So now that we know how to build a basic map up, let's look to see how we can customize it using map options. So this is the first map we created, and we created an options object that we then put into the map constructor, and that helps set up our map. It contained properties such as the center and the zoom. And there's other properties we can set as well. One of the things a lot of people don't like seeing on their map is this zoom control. And by setting the disable default UI property to true, we no longer see those options there. Another thing that annoys some people is when they're scrolling through a website and then there's a map placed in the middle of the page. And as they're scrolling, they'll start zooming in or zooming out on the map. So to fix this, we can pass through another property called scroll wheel and set that to false. So now when we try to scroll, we're not going anywhere. And then if you want to reverse it, you just need to set it to true, or you can even omit it. Another thing you can do is you can drag the map around, and this can be canceled out with the draggable property. So with draggable set to false, we can't move this map around. Another property people like to change is the map type. So we can set a value for the property map type ID, and we can set that to google.maps.maptypeid, and then we can set it to hybrid. And you can see that's a mixture between the road map and the satellite. And we could do the same thing by setting it to a satellite. And now we see that we don't see any of the markings for the map. And if we want to get it back to a road map, we just type in road map. You also can control at what length the user can zoom in on the page. So currently we're at a zoom level of 10, but if we set the max zoom to a level of 11, we can scroll down 1, but then from here we can't scroll anymore. And we can do something similar with the min zoom, and if we set that to 9, so we can see we can scroll down and we go from 10 to 11, but then if we scroll out, we can only go to a minimum zoom of 9. So this allows us to control at what levels the user can zoom in and out on this map. So right now we have the default UI disabled, but if we set this to false, we can see the controls again. And from here we can actually control the position of these controls on the page. So by setting zoom control options, we can set an object literal with that'll help tell us where we want it on the page. So one of the properties for this is the position, and this is in the google.maps.control position namespace, and then we can say we want it in the bottom _ left. Now we can see in the bottom left, we have our map controls. And we even can set the style. So in the google.maps.zoomControl style, we can set it to small. Now you can see that we have a small version, and if we go back to default, we see we get the larger version. So our zoom controls are down to the bottom left, but our pan controls are still at the top. So we can set a property to move those down to the bottom as well. So just like above, instead of zoom control options, we'll do pan control options, and we'll set an object literal. And then we'll also set a position, and we'll go into the same google.maps.control position namespace. And now we have this into the bottom left. But we even can change this to left bottom, and it moves it over just a little bit more. And these directions and places are interchangeable, so you can change this to top left, and it goes back to the top left, or we can even say top _ right. But for now we'll keep it to left bottom. So these are just a couple of the ways you can customize your map with map options. And some of you might find this to be a pretty clunky process, that you have to provide this whole nested object literal. And if you want to be a bit more modular, you can actually abstract this object literal out into its own namespace. So we can create a new file, and we can call it map options. And we'll create a self-invoking anonymous function, and we'll pass through the window, and then we'll also pass through window.mapster. And mapster is just the namespace that we're going to be using to create a library in this video. So we can use mapster inside of this self-invoking anonymous function. However, there can be an issue with this window.mapster down here. And the problem is that there could be a null object. So we can do an OR check, and if this window.mapster doesn't exist, we can set it to an empty object literal. So this way, inside of our self-invoking anonymous function, we're guaranteed to be working with an object when we're using mapster. So inside of here, we can actually set our map options. So we'll set it to this object up here, and now this is the same map options that we were using on the other page. So if we go back to our index and we include this, And then we'll go back into our map options, and one thing we don't want to forget to do is import the Google namespace since we're using it inside of this self-invoking anonymous function. So now that Google's included, we'll go back into our script.js, and just like we've done previously, we can import window.mapster and do a null check for it as well. So now rather than setting up these options in this big object literal, we can go to mapster, and we can do mapster.map_options. And when we replace it with that, we can see that our map gets initialized with the same options. So now rather than having that big object literal in our main script file, we've moved it out into a smaller file. And anywhere we need to initialize a map with those options, we can just call mapster.map_options, and now that code is reusable. One thing you'll notice when you're using Google Maps is that Google Maps is like a bunch of little Lego pieces. You can build all sorts of things out of these Lego pieces. However, if you want them to do specific things, you're going to have to build those pieces over and over again. So rather than building these small pieces every single time we need them, it would be smarter for us to create a custom library for us to use. So in the next lesson, we're going to build upon our Mapster library, and we're going to create more methods that help us customize our Google Map.